what to do when you feel overwhelmed with life, and how to navigate stress and anxiety about all the impending tasks and responsibilities that you have. On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is pumpkin spice white Russian. So grab your mugs and let's talk about feeling overwhelmed and stressed and how to prioritize yourself in busy seasons of life. Hello, ghouls, goblins, and soju shotties, and welcome to the third installment of our Halloween series on Soju with Sarah. And today is finally a solo episode. I know I haven't done one of these in so long. I think it's sometimes just really hard to just speak to myself in like my living room and just with no one to banter with. I wanted to talk about a little bit of a more serious topic today, so I wanted to do a solo episode. Originally, I thought the Halloween series would be more playful and fun, but sometimes life is just a little bit overwhelming, and then you just randomly want to talk about things, so that is what we're doing today. So I originally wanted to be in a different costume, like a more blasphemous costume. If you're on my Instagram, I was actually in that costume on Instagram, but I don't know. I just felt like it was the wrong tone for this. So I am a reindeer today. I had these reindeer ears in the closet and I don't know why I have these. I know it's not Christmas yet, but I feel like this is just a fun little set of ears to put on. So before we get started with the episode, let's go through the drink of today, which is a pumpkin spice white Russian. I love white Russians. If I'm forced to pick a drink at a bar, it's going to be a white Russian. And then usually they say there's no white Russian. So then I go for something like a margarita. But I love white Russians, and you're technically supposed to add graham crackers to the rim of it, but I didn't know how to get it on the rim of my mug, my soju mug. So I just added it inside, and I feel like it's soggy now, but let's try it. I think it is soggy. But the drink is good. I like the white Russian. But let's get started with the episode. So today I feel like I just wanted to talk about this overwhelming sense of feeling like you're overwhelmed. And I think lately I've been feeling like this transition of seasons, like literal seasons, is pushing me into a new season of life. And whenever there's any transition or change or movement in my life, I always feel a lot of stress and a lot of worry and a lot of anxiety moving into a new part of life. And also I feel like as I get older, there's more and more things to juggle. So random insurance claim, I literally have an insurance claim from 2 years ago that I continuously have to call back to check up on because it for some reason has not gotten cleared. There's things like medical bills, there's things like back pain and all these responsibilities and things that you just have to keep track of in your head. And I feel like it's been getting to me a lot lately because there's new things that I want to do with myself, and I do want to invest more time and energy and mental bandwidth into the podcast and take on more leadership roles at work and move up in my career. I just want to do so many things, and I feel like sometimes there's not enough time, and then it just snowballs into this feeling of being so overwhelmed with life and not wanting to do any of it. And so quite frankly, I've just been feeling extremely overwhelmed. Some of you guys who follow me outside of the podcast probably know that I took a break from work over the summer, and it was a very nice time to focus on myself, my health, and my body. And a big reason that I took it is because I felt like I was very overworked, and it's a combination of, I think, always wanting to be doing something and always having different ambitions and different goals, but also getting to a point where I feel like I was sacrificing my physical health for that. And it was also getting to a point where I would just be randomly crying and randomly having pains and randomly feeling nauseous and sick. And it's just a lot of signals for my body telling me that I needed to take a break. So it's been a month and a half or 2 months of being back at work now. And I think there's a lot of shift and transition. Like I didn't realize this going back into a corporate job again after taking some time off, that corporate life moves really fast. And so I'm on a new project now and like just a totally different space. And I'm just trying to pick up where I left off, but also pick up something new. So it feels like a lot of transition at work. And I feel like every season I come to face with this idea of what am I doing with my career and what am I doing with my life and what am I thinking about? And literally my first episode ever on this podcast was about facing this opportunity cost and like thinking about what I wanted to do with myself. And I think just every season I go through the same existential crisis. I also think this season is a little bit different too, because I have a lot more things that I care about dearly. And it's not to say I didn't have things that I preoccupied myself with and really cared about. But this podcast, for example, is very fresh and new for me. And so I want to give it my all and I want to pour everything into it. And just having to build up structure around doing the podcast and working my job and doing all the other things with my life without sacrificing anything is really difficult. And usually you do have to sacrifice something. But I think this new season also brings the challenges of consistency. And I've been trying to be very consistent with this podcast, like posting every week. And I know you soju shotties are here every Friday, and I'm so grateful for that. But I'm learning to find cadence. And I feel like a part of that process of running a one-woman show, and I guess sometimes two, one woman, one man, two-person show with James is a lot of work and a lot of stress and anxiety. And I think part of my feeling of overwhelm this season comes from also having so many goals and things I want to do with this podcast and things I want to share. And I take a lot of time to like film every week. I work with my fabulous editor. I review the edits, I refine, I post, I write the descriptions, I manage the social medias. And I think at a certain point, I know that there's growth to come from it, but I just feel like that on top of my full-time job recently has been really bogging me down. And I worry too, because sometimes I think I lean too much onto James as kind of a crutch for when I don't do enough planning for an episode or enough prepping or outlining or thinking about what I want to talk about. And yeah, so I guess the moral of that story is I always love feedback. Like one of the things that I feel like helps me the most in life that I mentioned in another episode too is getting feedback and like from you guys too. So if there's anything you guys don't like or want to see changed or feel like is going like in a different direction than you expected, please let me know. I am always open in the DMs. I've been getting a lot of DMs from you guys recently and I love it. And I have such a hard time keeping up with it sometimes, but I try to get to all the DMs when I can. And I really do appreciate you guys so much. But anyways, one last thing before we start the episodes is another reason I wanted to talk about this is because earlier this week, I had my first case of like jaw lock, I think. And I was, this is also very TMI. I feel like this podcast is very TMI, but I was yawning at work and suddenly I felt this like shooting pain down my jaw. And then I was like, oh, frick, I can't like close it. So I had to like massage the area down and it was like very, very scary for me because I've had TMJ in the past, like the clicking in your jaw. And that's also part of why I got Botox last year to get that resolved in my like teeth clenching. But I think when I'm very stressed, my body tells me nowadays, and that's part of getting older, but I was so worried because afterwards, anytime I yawned, shooting pain down my jaw. And then I had so much trouble eating for 2 days. So I was basically eating like sweet potatoes and anything that was soft and like soups and everything. But I think at a certain point, I feel like I'm the type of person to try to like push through difficult times and just try to get stuff done, even if I'm getting signals to maybe like slow down. And so that's why I wanted to talk about feeling overwhelmed today. Because this podcast sometimes is just also like an internal journal for me to kind of like keep track of lessons and values and tips to help remind me to be better to myself. So all in all, that is to say, today's topic is feeling overwhelmed and what to do when you feel overwhelmed with life and how to navigate the sense of stress and anxiety about all the impending tasks and responsibilities that you have. And yeah, so let's dive into it. I think this is a very universal feeling, so I won't try to explain it too much, but I think it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. And I feel like it's a common feeling that we share as humans, that sometimes there's just too much on your plate, or sometimes there's so many emotions around what you're doing and how your life is going that you just want to take a step back and you just want to breathe a little, but it feels hard to actually do that. So when I was thinking about this topic and planning this episode, I was really thinking about why it's so challenging when you feel like life is overwhelming. And the three biggest things that stood out to me are: one, the older you get, the more choices you have and the more decisions you have to take and the more opportunities you're given to quote unquote take control of your life. And so you're almost pushed to actively make decisions now rather than passively follow what everyone else is doing and follow the grade system and like follow these just general systems that are built for younger adults and like younger kids. For me personally, choice is very paralyzing. And I'm the type of person to want to do everything all the time. And so when it comes down to making a choice, I'd rather try to knock out everything rather than decide something specifically. And in doing that, I oftentimes compromise something bigger, which is like my health. And I think now that it's been a few years of not actively making choices for myself, I've kind of had to give up a bit of my mental and physical health in the meantime, which is also part of why I felt so burnt out at the beginning of the year when I was trying to do so many different things, like starting my pottery journey and learning pottery because I felt creatively very stuck in my career and my life. I started physical therapy because that's when I felt like my back pain was getting worse and worse and I needed to find a solution for it. I started my fitness journey because I felt like it was correlated with my back pain and I just felt like I was so out of shape and I needed to do something to improve my physical health. And that is also when I was thinking about starting this podcast too. I remember that led to so much of my burnout because I was just trying to prioritize everything and I was doing all the motions of everything that should technically be helping me, but at the end of the day was just burning me to the ground because I was running from appointment to the gym to the pottery studio, and I felt like I couldn't actually give myself a breather. And I think the more opportunities and options that open up in every season of life, I feel more and more incapable of making decisions because it just gets harder to filter through what's the best option or what's important and what can be deprioritized or pushed to a later time. And I think a personal example of that is when I was 23, 24, I was reached out to by a startup, like a really great startup, and I loved like the team dearly. It was literally only 2 people from my school, my alma mater, and I interviewed with them. I loved their product. I just resonated very dearly with the culture, and I've always been interested in startup. I was in the entrepreneurship club in college and I wanted to create a startup of my own at some point. But at the same time, I was just starting off my YouTube channel too. And I was also working at my first job and having those 2 things in my life. So my full-time job that I also really loved and my YouTube channel that I had started, I felt incapable of letting go of what I had to take on a new opportunity. So with that decision, I felt like I really couldn't make a decision because I didn't want to let go of things. And sometimes I think about how scared I am to make a decision because I'm just inherently scared of letting things go, which I think is the second challenge of feeling overwhelmed, which is sometimes it is just hard to let things go. A lot of the times I notice that when I'm stressed and anxious, it's because I don't want to compromise anything good in my life. I don't want to let go of things. Actually, even if it's bad, like anything good or bad, I just am scared of change. I was recently thinking about why in general I've just been scared of letting things go, whether it's like old clothes and people in my life and relationships or just general feelings, like feelings that I have when I'm in certain situations and in certain places. And I've been thinking about this a lot in respect to social media too, because I think a root cause of sometimes why I feel so overwhelmed is because I am on social media chronically, like a lot of people in our generation. But I have such a love-hate relationship with social media because on one end, there's so many good things about it. Like you stay really connected with friends, you stay really connected with people that you enjoy watching on the internet, and you also get a lot of validation, like people who support you and people who comment and people who, resonate with what you put out. But on the other hand, it just breeds such a toxic environment of constantly needing validation from other people, constantly feeling like you have to output to show people that you're alive, and also constantly just comparing yourself to what other people are doing online. But I think social media is part of why I feel so overwhelmed lately. So I do know that social media has its pitfalls and its downsides, but for me, it's just so hard to even stay off of social media for a week and just to say that I'm letting go of social media for my own mental health, because I always feel like I'm missing out on something, which I think is another reason that you keep things that make you feel overwhelmed around. It's just that you don't want to feel like you're missing out on anything. Something that I've noticed in my 20s is every year that passes, I realize more and more how scarce time is and how I really need to start letting go of things to allow my life to be better and to allow my peace to remain and to also just in general protect my peace. I think if I were to ask myself, so if my self from 21, 22 were to ask myself now, what things are worth letting go of earlier on rather than later, I think it would really be the alcohol consumption, the toxic friendships that you have fun with, but that bring you so much dysfunction in your life. The over introspection, which is overthinking too many things, over analyzing, over evaluating, over strategizing instead of actually actionating. All-nighters, I would definitely just knock out because sleep is so important. And then also just finding validation on social media. I think that has been so unhealthy, and it took so many years for me to kind of like remove myself from feeling like all my worth was in what other people thought of me. So that's my little short list of what I would have let go of earlier in my 20s if I could have. But that is number 2, which is letting go is really hard, whether it is people, places, situations, jobs, anything. I think the third reason that life gets more and more overwhelming, or just that being overwhelmed is really hard to navigate and challenging, is because our health gets worse and worse as we get older. Like, it just deteriorates by the second. And maybe this is a personal thing, but I just feel like every year my mental health has been wearing itself down. I think a couple of years ago, I felt so much more equipped to tackle my mental health issues. And also I felt like my mental health issues weren't so doom and gloom. And I definitely struggled a lot with feelings of being down and feelings of stress and feelings of having these existential crises. But now that I'm 27 and I've been through burnout and I've been through so many challenges with relationships, family, friends, I think it's harder to bounce back from having depression and having burnout. Like, I actively seek out ways to mediate my personal mental issues, like therapy and audiobooks and meditation and reading and listening to phenomenal podcasts like Soju with Sarah. But I just think that our brain and our body is no longer as well equipped to take care of itself in times of stress. And if you think about any device or machine that you have, when you get it for the first time, it is the most optimal. It's the fastest, versus after a couple of years, after a couple of months, maybe it starts randomly shutting down. Maybe the camera starts lagging. You run out of storage. I think our bodies are exactly the same. And that's like an analogy that everyone talks about. It's like we are just machines, or we are hypothetically like machines. Our bodies just are less equipped to handle stress the older that we get, because there's more things that bodies need to repair and take care of. But also going back to like the TMJ story I was telling at the beginning, my body can't handle stress anymore, and it shows so clearly in my body when I am stressed. And it manifests in like the back pains, the neck pains, the TMJ, and like all these random things that I didn't have when I was younger. So I guess the moral of this story is, if you are younger and you're watching and listening to this podcast, really do prioritize your health, because that is the one thing that you don't get back when you're older. And I think it's like one of the most important things that is easy to deprioritize, because you kind of just take your health for granted, and you kind of just assume that you can pull all-nighters and like study, and that you can just make up that sleep the next day or the next week. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way, and like your body tells you later on in life where you went wrong with it. And also wear sunscreen, because that is important. But now that we've talked about the feeling of being overwhelmed and why I think it's really challenging for us to navigate the sense of stress and anxiety around what we're doing in like our own lives, I wanted to talk about ways to navigate that, because I think that is like what is most helpful, instead of just like ruminating on how life is stressful and difficult. The way that I've been trying to approach it first, like the first step of how I approach feeling overwhelmed, is figuring out what exactly is causing it. And sometimes it could be a mix of things, but the categories that I like to split it up in are, one, if it's a single entity that's causing stress. So sometimes it could be work related, like there's a work deadline, or there's some pressure from upper management, or something at work or somewhere else that is causing you this stress. Two, it could actually just be the juxtaposition of different things. So it could be your financial goals against your work priorities, against your personal hobbies. It could be just the sense of having all these different goals that don't align and don't go very well together. That gives you the stress and anxiety around what you're doing. Or it could be mental, and it could be that you're feeling down, or that you're feeling particularly negative on a certain day, or you're feeling particularly lethargic and there's just so much on your plate for that day. I also think in that vein, it could also be a lack of time. I think there's been moments where I felt so overwhelmed about not having enough time to do stuff that it's just taken me down the spiral of wanting to find solutions, but then spending time on the solutions for the lack of time and then not doing the things that I needed to. Then I have less time and then it just keeps cycling through this sense of I just do not have time. And there's definitely other reasons for feeling overwhelmed, but those are the top of mind for me. I know sometimes it could be relationship based, having a very stressful relationship with someone or a coworker or maybe someone you don't even know that stresses you out. I think it's really important to figure out what is causing you this anxiety or stress and sense of overwhelm, and then developing your plan around that. And I think the biggest things that I've been able to do, I will list because I did write this down. And one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is to trim down the fat, which basically means to really, really hone in on your priorities and trim down all the other things that give you stress that you don't have to prioritize. So for me, a lot of my stress comes from feeling like I'm pulled in too many different directions, whether it's obligations to my family versus obligations to my friends and my social network, and also to my job, and also to random things like my hobbies and interests. Like I feel like I am constantly being pulled left and right by different competing interests that don't always go together. And obviously by trimming the fat, I don't mean just cut out anything that's not important to you. You could say yes to things that you still find joy in and that doesn't maybe actively contribute to your life. But I think being mindful of how you spend your time and what things you don't necessarily need to engage in or engage with is very important. I know for me, my current top priorities are family, health, and relationships with people. And when I think about things that I'm willing to say no to, I usually think about whether or not it actively contributes to these 3 priorities that I have. And obviously I have more priorities and I'll think about it in the context of those priorities too. But I used to be really afraid of saying no to things. And so I would always say yes. And it would lead me in situations where I'm somehow on like a trip for like a whole week and I didn't even know how I just fell into it, but then it took me away from time at work and time with my family and time in other situations. But I really do think if you're feeling overwhelmed because of a lack of time, trimming down the fat is so important. And it really is hard. It's like a learned skill to be able to say no to things, because I think we're kind of conditioned in life to always be open and receptive to new opportunities. And especially if it's new, like it's very hard to say no to new things and meeting new people. But knowing when saying no will give you peace of mind is really important. And obviously just do whatever makes you happy, like say yes to things if that is what brings you joy, but say no to things if you think it will cause you stress. When I was 25, I remember I held a party and I invited a friend. She's a few years older than me, but I met her through a mutual friend and I really liked her, and she was on her way to my party, and midway walking to my party, she texted me and said, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm feeling so overwhelmed right now and I don't think I can make it to your party. I'm literally dressed and like halfway to your party." And I remember thinking it was so like interesting. Like I had never been in a situation. I feel like people usually say like, "Oh, sorry, something came up, I can't come." But she was so honest and transparent about the fact that she was already on her way, but she stopped herself from coming to my party because she was feeling a certain way about it. And I think she had also expressed that she wasn't in the right headspace to be meeting people and she was actually looking forward to it. But then she felt so stressed and anxious coming on the way here. And I think at the time I understood her, but now that I'm 27, I really understand her, because sometimes there is that like gut instinct that you might be putting yourself in situations that might drain you and might make you unhappy. And ultimately, I think it's really important to be honest with yourself about what things you should really trim out of your life. But again, the pillar is happiness, and you should always evaluate against your priorities, but also your happiness in doing things. I think in a similar vein, doing things that align with your values is really important. And that is also the biggest way to protect your peace and your mental health, because I personally find that when my energy is drained, that then leads me to feeling more frustration and more negative feelings around myself, even if it's unrelated to the thing that drained my energy. But this could be in relation to events, to people, to situations. Of course, not everything is in your control, but whenever it is, I think it's a very relevant tip to protecting your peace. This next tip I think I learned in the course of this year, which is don't try to fix everything all at once. And I had to learn this the hard way because at the beginning of the year, like I had mentioned, I started my pottery journey because I was just very much craving something creative because it had been like a very long period of time where I wasn't doing anything new or creative or sparking that interest in the arts for me. But I started taking wheel throwing classes and then I moved on to hand building classes. But I also was trying to tackle my back pains, started physical therapy, was going to medical appointments to see if anything was wrong with me. I started my fitness journey. I was learning how to weightlift for the first official time and like getting into the routine of going to the gym twice a week minimum, and also wanting to do things like running. And I also wanted to start my podcast back then. And I thought all of these things would quote unquote fix me and fix all the problems I was having back then, whether it be like physical pain or dissatisfaction with like the way I looked or dissatisfaction with the way I spent my time and like the creative things I was doing with my time. And I remember back in May or June, I was just getting to a point where I really felt like I was doing everything because I had signed up for it and that nothing was getting better. Like as much as I was going to physical therapy every week, the pain was just somehow getting worse. And as much as I was trying to focus on the podcast and trying to build that out and like plan for everything, I somehow couldn't sit down and film an episode because I just felt like I wasn't in the right headspace and the right mindset. And I felt like with my pottery, all I had time to do was just go in and practice every week. And it would always be at the very end of my workday where I'm exhausted and I still have to go in and like physically exert myself to make mugs and plates and things like that. And I think the most fulfilling thing that I did out of that time was pottery because it really sparked this whole new creative hobby for me, which I'm very thankful for. But I think that is why I burnt out, because I was just feeling overwhelmed with everything that I was doing. And I know I had gone into it trying to fix a lot of things, but I felt like for most of these things, it was just getting worse and worse for me. And I couldn't really explain why until I sat down and really thought about how much I'm doing with my time. And I think on paper, it doesn't sound like that much until you schedule it into your calendar and you see how booked up and blocked out your calendar is. And to maintain the same amount of like peace and comfort that you have before a ton of change, it's very difficult when you're faced with constant shifts and movements in your life. So yeah, moral of the story is don't try to fix everything at once. It ends up getting more overwhelming if you try to do that. Also, a sub tip on that is not everything has to be a self-improvement project. James is actually the one that taught me this because he had mentioned that you shouldn't always have to optimize for perfection when it comes to things that you're trying to fix in your life. So maybe if it was something like me feeling sad about not being as creative as a person, that maybe I didn't need to invest in a whole like 6 to 12 week course on pottery just to feel like I'm fixing something and to treat that part of my stress, but that I could have done things in a more fun way. I think partly because there's so much social media nowadays about like getting your shit together and fixing my life and like getting my life together. I think it's really easy to think that everything needs to be fixed and everything needs to be optimized and like made perfect. But yeah, not everything is a self-improvement project. And I think a good tip relating to that is to take solutions one step at a time. So if you're overwhelmed because of a list of different things, try to think about what you want to tackle first and kind of do it in an order or some amount of an order, because it's really so much quicker, like from my personal experience, to focus on one thing at a time. And so maybe making it a goal to work on your fitness for a whole month before you move on to the next goal of working on something creative and starting a creative project, and then moving on to another goal of improving your cooking skills or meal prepping more. I think it gives you more structure in your life to have things that you're taking one step at a time. I feel like that's why there's a saying that's like, take life one step at a time, or something like that. I'm really bad at knowing the exact phrasing for like common sayings, but I think the sentiment is that it's much easier to fix things and ease your worries and stress around things when you're just taking it one step at a time. Also, something I've learned through having back pain is change also takes time. So it's really easy when I'm overwhelmed to want all my problems to kind of go away and to also just not deal with any of them because I don't want to. But I think through my back pain journey and also my fitness journey, which I was very actively on up until the summer, I realized how much change can happen over a long course of time and how you don't even notice it happening until you're deep into it. And I think with my fitness journey, at least, I didn't notice a clear difference in my body and like the way it looked until a month into it. And then after that is when I actually started progressively noticing change every single week. And I think that's really important when it comes to tackling this sense of being overwhelmed, because you might just want all your problems to go away at once, but it does require a lot of patience to see things improve slowly. And I think I am trying to learn the art of patience. I think that is a really good skill to have in life, and to try to allow myself some time to see things get better. And it does get better. Like, life gets a lot better when you're not just waiting around for it to get better and you're actually taking steps to actively change day by day. I think that's like a common tip that I share on this podcast, which is build habits one at a time. I think I said that somewhere. I was also talking to James recently because he was feeling really overwhelmed with his creative projects and trying to do everything at once. And I remember I had like left the room and he was working, and he was like face down working on his laptop. I come back into the room like 4 hours later and his eyes are bloodshot. He seems so stressed. He's like hunched over his laptop. And I was like, oh my God, are you okay? And he was just saying that he hadn't looked up from the screen in the last 4 hours because he was so focused on what he was doing. And I remember telling him that it's okay to take breaks. Like, it's okay to just pause for 5 minutes, and allowing yourself the action of pausing and breathing and thinking, and not just constantly being hyper focused on something, is actually much healthier and much more productive than being laser focused and not allowing yourself any break. And I think that's also what causes burnout too, just in general, is not allowing yourself some peace in between the stressful moments. And whether it's like a 5-minute break or a 2-day break, breaks are so important. I also think it's really easy to not think about having short breaks. A lot of the times when I think about work breaks, I think like, oh, I'm going to go on vacation for 2 weeks and that's going to be my break. But I know people take mental health days, like even if it's just for a day you take off of work, it can really kind of stagger your stress in a way that helps you navigate it and alleviate a lot of the anxieties, like the constant anxieties that you hold on to on a day-to-day basis. But of course, I do understand what it feels like to really tunnel vision on something that you're doing or something that you care about. But I also feel like that tunnel vision is what causes you anxiety, because you don't allow yourself to really think about anything else in that time. This next tip / solution is be willing to lean on people. And I was talking about this recently with someone, I forget who it was, but for some reason in our generation, when it comes to raising kids, it's very much an independent task. Like, you raise your kid with your partner if you have a partner, and there's not much leaning onto neighbors and friends and other people in your community to help you support your kid and parenthood. And in previous generations, it was very much a community thing. Like, raising kids was a community effort, and you would ask your neighbors to help you with parenting chores, and you would ask your parents to help, and you would ask anyone in your community. And there was just this level of support that somehow is getting diminished over the years. Also, I think it is because of like safety concerns too, when it comes to letting your children be around other people. But I think in general, there's less of a sense of asking people to help out and always wanting to take care of everything yourself. And I definitely am a culprit of that. I feel like oftentimes when it comes to problems I'm facing, I want to tackle it head on myself. And I don't even think, like, it doesn't even cross my mind that I could ask a friend to help me do something until it is dire and it's at the point where like I do need to ask for help. Otherwise I can't do it. But even things like moving and helping to pick up a package and other things like that, I think I'm only really, really comfortable asking James most of the time. So I guess this tip is not to say like ask your neighbors to help you with everything, but sometimes to not be afraid to lean on to other people for support, and especially friends that you trust, your family members. I think your partner is also always a very good support system to have. But I was talking to James about this recently, actually, because we both split household duties and we kind of do our part in the home. But recently, because I've had a lot on my plate, I felt like I needed more support around household chores, and I just felt like I didn't even have the mental bandwidth and like the time to do things like doing the dishes or cooking or cleaning. And I was just getting to a point where I was kind of holding it within myself too, because I didn't want to ask him to help out more, and I didn't want him to actively put in more effort when I know that he has a lot going on too. But it got to a point where I think he noticed that I was feeling extremely burdened that week, and I think it's because I had this list of chores that I hadn't done yet that was at the very back of like this long to-do list of things to do. And he confronted me about it, and we had a conversation, and he kind of made it clear that I should ask for help and I should be actively willing to lean on him, because he is my partner and someone that is there to support me in tough times. I think that made me realize how important it is to be willing to lean on people, because there's different seasons of feeling stressed, and there's different reasons in these seasons that you feel stressed. And in some situations, there's times when you can actively ask for help and ask for support in maybe one of the areas that's causing you stress. But I think that was very helpful for me to realize that he is there and he's willing and happy to help out whenever I need a helping hand. And I think it was very valuable for me too, to know that I have that role for him whenever he is very busy and does not have the time to maybe cook or clean or do other things around the house. This last tip, if you are a soju shotty, a lifelong soju shotty, you probably already know what I'm going to say, but it's positivity. And I think I am just such a strong believer in having a positive mindset and how that translates well into your health, your mentality, and just your general approach to life. I think there is not a single episode where I've not talked about being positive in one way or another. But I think with certain topics, when it comes to feeling overwhelmed, positivity is such a key to unlocking the right mindset to approach stress and anxiety. However, I do know that positivity is just such a broad term, and it's not really a clear defined solution. So before I filmed this episode, I did write down a few hacks to hack positivity when you don't particularly feel like being so happy and giddy and joyful. Here are some ways to make yourself feel that. I think I mentioned this tip in the last episode, but you should smile whenever you look in a mirror. And when you see yourself smiling actively, even if you're not in a good mood, it mentally trains yourself to think that you're in a better mood than you actually are. And so in the long run of seeing yourself smiling constantly whenever you see a mirror, you end up feeling just better. And I think that's one thing I'm trying to implement, which is to smile when I look in the mirror. The second is to do breathing exercises. And I think there's a book called Breath that I know James read. It's somewhere in this apartment that I really have been meaning to read. But it's about how important it is to breathe and to breathe properly and to really breathe well. And I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know that breathing techniques can really help with your mental headspace and helping ease anxiety and stress. And one of the breathing exercises that I found online was the 4-7-8 breathing technique. And I'm going to look off to the side so I can read this. But this technique basically involves breathing for 4 seconds, then holding your breath for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8. And apparently this breathing pattern reduces anxiety and helps people sleep. But apparently this is a form of pranayama, which is the practice of breathing regulation. Also, one thing that James and I do, or mostly James, he likes to tape his mouth so that he doesn't mouth breathe at night, because apparently that causes poor sleep, and then poor sleep can cause more higher amounts of anxiety and yada, yada, yada. So if you guys are interested, there's something called hostage tape. There's something called hostage tape that you can put on your mouth when you go to sleep. The last tip that I want to give you guys is one thing I learned in therapy. I feel like I learn a lot of things in therapy, but it's to build a happy place. I say quote unquote happy place because you're not actually building a physical place, but you're building this mental space for yourself. But I remember when I was feeling extremely overwhelmed, and this was 2 years ago when I was early on in my therapy sessions, my therapist asked me to close my eyes and to think of somewhere relaxing, somewhere calm, somewhere peaceful, somewhere that I wanted to just mentally be at. And she told me to envision that place very vividly and to lay out the specifics of what that place was. And I didn't have to actively say it to her out loud, but I would keep note of what it was. So if it was a beach, what did the water feel like? What color is the sand? What color is the sky? Like, what are all the little specifics? And she told me to remember that place in my head and to hold on to it for whenever I was feeling extremely anxious and stressed, to always just close my eyes and recall that same space. And it kind of builds this memory of this familiar, not familiar place where you can kind of mentally plug into whenever things are getting a little overwhelming. And I think that's kind of similar to like the don't be afraid to take 5-minute breaks thing, where you're just allowing your brain to step back and step away from the situation that's causing you stress and to let yourself be present somewhere else. So I think that practice of like visual imagery and visualization can be helpful for some people. I think a lot of these tips are targeted towards more mental overload and trying to ease the sense of stress in your head. Obviously, sometimes stress comes from very, very practical and real situations like being in debt or having some other situation where you can't just tackle it with mental solutions. But for anyone who's kind of going through it and wants to take a breather with me, I hope this episode was helpful. I think personally, I'm trying to be better about, I say this every time I'm going through a crisis. I'm literally like, I'm trying to be better to myself and take care of myself. I'm really taking that seriously. I know it's sometimes hard to prioritize yourself above anything else, but I think we should all be kind to ourselves, give ourselves some time and peace and space to really work through what is causing us trouble and pain. And yeah, that's all. I think I wanted to just share that this week because it's been a very hectic month for me, and I'm very grateful for all the opportunities and things that I've been doing this month. But at the same time, I just needed a little bit of pause and a little bit of a break. So thank you guys for listening as always. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please rate us on Spotify. And James is not here to say this today, but it is very important for our podcast. And I personally wanted to thank all of you guys who have been listening and sharing and rating us and just giving all this positive feedback. I am also always open to feedback, like I mentioned. So if you have episode suggestions for the podcast in general, what you want to see, what you don't want to see, please let me know in the comments as well. And I hope to see you guys next week. It will be the last Halloween episode in this series, so it's going to be a very fun one, and James will be here next time. So thank you guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bloopers.
It's bloopers.
Is that on?
Yeah.
It's recording? Okay.
Bleep lore, bleep lore, bleep bleep bleep. We come in peace. This is an intermission segment of Soju with Sarah. Bleep lore.
Is that alien enough? Hello and welcome to the intermission segment of Soju with Sarah. That previous segment, if that happened, do you want to say it?
Oh yeah. If we decide to keep the previous segment, James was an alien. That was James. Do not worry, we were not robbed by an alien.
We weren't robbed by an alien. I was the alien. However, the mask did not have a mouth, so I did not want to have that on the whole time. So now I am a pickle.
And a very handsome pickle.
I'm Pickle James.
What the? This is actually going to be my costume for this episode, but I felt like the topic and this costume were a little bit too, Also, we're just sharing my mic today because the setup for the mic's a little bit annoying. But we have some Halloween candy that we wanted to try. Of course, in the spirit of Halloween episodes, we would have to do something Halloween related. So we have some classic Halloween candies that we're just gonna go through.
They're not that classic because the grocery store didn't have the most Halloween-y candy. So the Reese's are the most Halloween-y, followed by the Sour Patch Kids here. And then this is a wild card one. I just got some Whoppers because Whoppers were some of my favorites growing up. So
I kind of forget what Whoppers tasted like, but I remember I didn't like them as much.
Just like chocolatey milk balls.
Oh, you know my favorite chocolate milk ball?
What?
Milk Duds.
Okay. Why are you giggling like that?
Actually, hot take. I personally didn't like Reese's that much. I'm going to wait for you to finish the sounds.
Reese's or Reese's?
I think it's Reese's. Reese's Puffs.
Reese's Puffs. Reese's Puffs. Eat 'em up, eat 'em up, eat 'em up.
I personally didn't like Reese's as much when I was a kid. I also think I still don't like it. It's funny because Moose is blocking the whole scene. So whether or not we eat it is actually up. Oh.
Better than I remember.
I think I'll give it a 5. I've never been a huge fan of Reese's. Unfortunately, sorry you guys.
No, so now should we go Sour Patch Kids or Whoppers next?
I'll say Whoppers.
It's less exciting.
I realize how awkward it is that we're sharing one mic because we cannot talk over each other. We have to wait for one person to done.
No, why did you hold it up to the Whopper? I was giving you one.
Maybe
Giving you one.
the Whopper had something to say. Wait, I forgot Whoppers were crunchy.
Crunchy.
Oh, I think that's better than I remember. I'm gonna give that a 7 out of 10.
The pickle is coming out of his pickle. I would give that an 8. I love Whoppers.
All right, Sour Patch Kids next. I see you ate another one.
Say the tagline.
Sour Patch Kids.
First they're sour, then they're sweet.
Then they're sweet. If you guys are watching the video, or if you're on the podcast on Spotify or anywhere else, please comment what your favorite Halloween candy was growing up, or now, if you are a 5-year-old watching our podcast.
If you're a Juicy J, you will not comment that because you're going to show support of me.
But that's like lack of engagement for this episode.
If you're a fan of me, just say no comment.
What? Oh, what was your favorite color of the Sour Patch Kids growing up?
My favorite color? I don't see color. I treat everyone as equals. Woo.
You're also colorblind. Cheers.
3 words. Please and oh brother.
What?
It's not even that sour, so that's my reaction. Please, oh brother. It's not even that sour.
Why is that your reaction?
I don't know.
Your reaction could be, it's not even that sour. 3 words. It's not sour. Anyways, we have 2 minutes on the clock.
I've eaten like 6 of these.
Oh my god.
They're so good.
Okay, in 2 minutes, what was your favorite Halloween memory as a kid?
Sorry to be a buzzkill, but my parents are Christian, so they were also of the belief that Halloween costumes were not really that, of God, So I didn't really ever dress up for Halloween or anything.
Oh, wait, ever?
Well, the church near us did a trunk or treat. I don't know if anyone's done those, but
What is a trunk or treat?
a car would go down the street next to the church, and then they would like throw out candy from the trunk of the car.
That's kind of inefficient if they're just throwing it out.
Oh, actually, anyways, yeah, never mind. That's whatever. Yeah, that's pretty much one of the only traditions we ever did.
Okay, rate the Sour Patch Kid in 1 minute before the battery dies.
Rate it? 8 out of 10.
I give it a 9.
I love you all, and thanks for having me on for the episode. Thank you.
All right, back to the episode.